Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of the writing retreat. Your session with me yesterday went over building healthier writing habits and writing productively. And I hope you had a great couple of sessions afterwards with Sean. Today, we're extending that conversation by figuring out how to incorporate different people into your writing process. Because one of the biggest myths that I didn't go over yesterday, saved it for today, is that writing is a solo activity. So the truth is there are actually many different kinds of collaborative settings that occur in writing. And the reason we tackled your personal writing process yesterday is because having an understanding on your own tendencies and habits will help you collaborate with other people more effectively. So on this slide, I've tried to outline the different kinds of collaborations that you may encounter in your writing career as a graduate student. So these can occur with different kinds of people. So the first few that I've laid out are the different kinds of collaborations that occur with your peers. You'll see the word consulting pop up a few different times, and we're going to define what consulting means. And you can do writing consulting with. So in this session, we're going to go over how to get the most out of your peer collaborations, whether it's consulting, doing a peer review, or working in a support group. How to get the most out of your collaborations with us in a writing center appointment, or a co-writing project where you are combining multiple authors onto one manuscript, and then also when you're seeking feedback from your instructor. So to start, I found this research paper on people who created a writing lab in a nursing school exactly like this. There are only a few in the country. And I thought it was super interesting to discover what collaborative writing meant to graduate students specifically. And I wanted to include this quote that really gets at the heart of why this can be such a complicated thing to do. It says, there's an unfortunate atmosphere in education and academia wherein students are unconsciously discouraged from mutual sharing of work and ideas by the stigmatizing effects of a competitive culture. We agreed that getting over the initial embarrassment of sharing one's work conferred huge advantages, and that ideally places of learning should function as communities and on the basis of mutual trust and respect among their members. So when we say that writing is often misconstrued as a solo activity, it brings up these images of reclusive authors who never leave their home and never talk to anybody, and they're super alone. And on the one hand, sure, that's a stereotype for fiction writers, but the stereotype of writing being a solo activity for academic writers is just as true because of exactly what this quote talks about, the sort of subversive or maybe explicit competitive nature. And we want to try and just deconstruct that idea today. And when me and Ashland actually were discussing this workshop, we were trying to discuss why writing collaboratively is so important and why we wanted to talk to you about it today. And Ashland actually had this great quote that I wanted to include on the slide. She said, because writing is emotional and personal, like we went over yesterday, it should be collaborative in the same way that we ask for help in other parts of our lives. So one, I thought that was just a beautiful way of stating this. And then second of all, it just goes to show how collaborating, the way me and her were discussing this project, really helped illuminate my point, my argument, and it was just sort of like a case in point thing that I wanted to include. The characteristics that are outlined on this slide here are actually pulled from a book called Students Helping Students, and it's a handbook about peer tutoring. And what I really like about this is it shows that successful peer tutoring doesn't necessarily have to do with giving the right answer or knowing how to do something correctly. The foundation of a successful peer collaboration, whether it's, again, tutoring or consulting is the word we like to use, is that it has these characteristics of helpfulness. And that really resonated with me because it's actually taken me a long time to see the value in peer collaborations, because I get a little insecure and I get a little emotional when I present my writing to other people. In writing center appointments with a consultant or other people that I trust, I know that I can have these characteristics from the get-go as a foundation for our appointment that make me feel safe sharing my writing. And a lot of times these characteristics are not there in your typical peer review, which is why I and so many other people hesitate to do peer collaboration evaluations or peer reviews. So the writing lab here is one place where you're going to find writing consultations. It's where you go when you know you can't write alone and you need to get help with your writing. And consulting often gets misconstrued, especially in the writing lab, as an editing or proofreading service. And this is where I'm going to ask you to recall the difference that we talked about yesterday between global and local revisions. A lot of times when people come to the writing lab with a document that they need help with, they've been able to self-evaluate and know that something needs to be worked on, but they can't quite determine what specifically needs to be worked on. So they'll use a lot of catch-all phrases like, I need to work on my flow, I need to work on my grammar, which are things that may be true, but those things can actually stand for a lot of other things that need to be worked on, like your structure, your main ideas, your arguments. So in a consulting session at the writing lab, our goal is to make you a better writer so that you can have more control over your writing process. And it gets misconstrued as an editing or proofreading service. And the difference between consulting and editing is consulting is collaborative, and we're trying to work together to make progress, whereas editing or proofreading is very transactional. And a lot of the times the consultants will set a boundary and manage expectations to ensure to explain to you our process, that we will not be working on your paper like that and fixing things. We're going to try and illuminate areas of development for you to fix and for you to take control over. We're explaining how writing consulting works because it's not just a service that you can seek from us. It's a service that you all can provide to each other. By knowing how a consulting session works and how to give feedback, you can ask for better feedback and make that exchange more helpful in your helping relationships. One of the distinct parts about a writing consulting session is that it's inquiry-based. So you're going to be, when you meet up with a writing consultant, you're going to get a lot of questions thrown at you. And the first few questions are going to deal with managing these expectations. We want to know what you're working on, how you've been working on it so far, where you're struggling with it, how you feel about it, your constraints. We want to know everything about the project. A lot of what we want to know has to do with the writing environment in your process. So it may feel when you get to a consulting session like you have to explain the topic that your research is on and give us a crash course in the subject. But the truth is, we can help troubleshoot the writing without knowing specifically the topic, because we can recognize verbiage, flow, structure, argument, logic, citations, and the explanation of the subject and the content is going to come along the way. So the most important thing that we as consultants want to hear from you in the beginning of a session is everything about the writing project and its expectations, and what you want out of the session. And if it's your first time in a writing lab, we're probably going to explain to you a little bit about what we do, that difference between editing and consulting. So these are the type of questions that you will typically see in a normal writing center appointment. The questions are going to start with those things about the process and also setting some micro goals together. The messy middle, as we like to say, is when we're sort of trying to untangle and unwind all of your ideas so we can make sense of them later on. That's why we have that knitting icon for this messy middle section. And this is a really dialectic method, so it involves a lot of discussion. So in a writing center appointment, it may feel like you're doing more talking than writing. But that's what needs to be done in order to determine like where you're trying to go. And even though it's a lot of talking, you can still do the pre-writing techniques, jotting things down, making notes, annotating, defining, and doing global revisions and sort of revisioning how you want your paper to look and how your argument is going to be effective based on the answers to these questions. So even if it's not drafting new or more words on the page, you're still doing that rearrangement and revisioning of the document to make it more coherent, make it more logical, make it more focused. And then the end is going to be tying up the loose ends, recapturing the progress that we made, and making a plan going forward. Because again, in trying to make you a better writer, not necessarily a better writing product, part of that is helping make sure you have the next steps and the tools to continue working on it without our help. You'll notice in all three of these sections, we have questions about how you're feeling. How are you feeling about this assignment? How are you feeling about this section? How are you feeling about what we got done today? Because the writing process is so emotional. And if you have discomfort in any part of it, that helps us know what we need to work on the most. So it really helps to be candid about your feelings. This is from the same article about the writing lab in the graduate nursing program. And one of the students was asked, how have your peers in the graduate nursing program helped you improve your skills as a writer? And the person said, not as much as a writer, but mostly as reviewers of my research. By pointing out specific areas that needed to be further explained. So I thought this was really impactful for two reasons. The first was that learning how to consult is going to help you in ways that you don't realize. And you may go into a consulting session or a writing endeavor thinking to understand new things or certain new things or grow in certain ways, and you're going to end up understanding different things and growing in different ways. And the second thing that it helps with is that the writing process is really subconscious. And sometimes you don't realize that the work is being done until you look back on it in hindsight and think, yeah, actually, like this did help me in one way, even if it didn't help in another way. This is our first activity for today, and I'm going to ask the facilitator, once I'm done explaining, to pause the video for 30 minutes. So in this session, you're going to pair up with one other person or two other people, just small groups are best, and you're going to focus on revising. So you're going to have one person be the writing consultant and the other person be the writer. You're going to take turns, and the writer should imagine that they have a finished draft of writing, and tell the consultant or decide with them what section to work on. Set a micro goal. And then set 1 to 2 specific things that you want feedback on. So you can pretend that you have a manuscript, or if you have like an old piece of writing that you are familiar with, you can pretend to work on it further, or take one of your better free writes from yesterday's workshops. But you should mimic a writing center session where the consultant should take control. I can go back to the slide where we had the messy middle, beginning, and end questions, and sort of mimic the flow of a consulting session. The outcome of this goal should be focused and specific feedback on the 1 to 2 things that the writer asked for. Take turns giving feedback on only those things. If you have time at the end of the 30 minutes, then you can go over what else the consultant noticed. Ask them, okay, well, we met my goals today. What else did you see? What else do you think we should jump to? Or vice versa, ask the writer, like, what else were you feeling like you wanted help on? Turn back here. And you can pause on this slide to mimic the writing center session and then play after 30 minutes. Okay, now that you've done that writing consultant session, we're going to do another one. And instead of revising something that's already written, this is going to be focused on brainstorming an entirely new project, because you can do a consulting session before anything is even written. So you can take an idea from your free write, that's okay. Or you can start with a completely new idea. Start with discussing, like, what interests you. One of you is going to start as the writer, the other is going to start as the consultant, and the consultant should ask the writer as many questions about what they're writing, thinking, and the directions that are possible with their idea. And again, you can do this with a free write that you've written, or you can do it with a completely new idea. There should be a clear idea of what they're writing on, or a modified statement of the problem, or jotted down notes. Just these examples of free writing or pre-writing. And then you'll switch roles and repeat. So you can go ahead and pause the video for another 30 minutes to work on this. Hopefully from those activities, you got a sense for how inquiry and dialectic can drive a writing center session forward. And it'll make more sense if you've had a writing center appointment, why we use that conversation more instead of pinpointing places on the paper to jump to and just fix things. Hopefully you can understand the intention and impact of that conversation more. So I want to actually jump to collaborating with your instructors, in the sense that they are people who can give you feedback too. And when you are seeking feedback from an instructor, you have to think about how they're in a different role. When you come to a writing center session and When you come to a writing center session, you're asking for feedback from a writing professional or a writing expert. So like I said earlier, we don't need to know the content or the specific research or subject of what you're working on. If it's explained well enough and argued well enough, we will pick up on it as the paper goes, but we don't need to be, and we are not content experts when you bring your writing to us. On the other hand, when you bring your writing to your instructors or when you're getting feedback from them, they are content experts. And they may have experience writing, but they're not necessarily going to be writing experts. So it's a good idea when you come to both a writing consultant and an instructor for feedback, you recognize the different kinds of feedback that are going to be most beneficial to give. So I tried to break down the categories of what this looks like. When you're talking about your writing with your instructor, tell them what you need help with specifically. Is it the genre? Is it something about the QI that is unfamiliar to you and you want to know more about like what the audience is looking for, what this purpose should be, sort of the rhetoric about it? Or is it the content? Do you want to make sure that the subject you've chosen is relevant, the methods are good, it is significant to the current field? Or is it the writing? Is this style compatible with normal QIs or dissertations? Is the length, are the conventions normal? This last one I think is also really important. If you are asking a writing center consultant or instructor for feedback, recognize if they're going to be the only person you are asking for feedback from. And if they're not, it's a good idea to let them know the feedback you've gotten prior to this. It is super helpful when you come to a writing center appointment with instructor feedback, so we can see what your instructor is aiming for. And then likewise, if you go to your instructor for help, you can say, listen, I've already been to the writing lab and these are the things that I worked on. And then that can help you set your goals in that discussion going from there. Pivoting to a different type of writing collaboration is co-writing or co-authoring something, which happens a lot in the sciences. And in order to do that, you need the same characteristics of a helping relationship as a consulting session, where you're both approaching this being careful and considerate with the other writer's emotions in mind. But there are a little bit more strategies and mechanics to keep in mind. In the Writing Productively workshop, we talked about defining your purpose, or maybe that was Ashlyn's workshop in the QI, defining your aims and your argument. That's something that can be really hard to do on your own. And when you add another person into the mix, it's even harder and also more important. So as you are pre-writing together, see if you can get on the same page as quickly or clearly as possible what your common aim is. And you should take minutes or notes for everything that you discuss, because that is pre-writing. That dialectic, that exchange, you're going to be discussing a lot of great ideas, and you don't want to count on them staying up in your mind because they will go away. And they'll be clear if you get them on paper as soon as possible. And this is a hard one to accept, working for consensus, not necessarily total agreement. When you are writing a paper even by yourself, all you can hope for is that your readers can reach a consensus with you, because they may not agree with what you say. That's the whole reason you write a paper in the first place, is because people probably don't agree on something. So you and your co-author might not totally agree on something, but if you can establish your consensus between the two of you, also clearly and quickly, it's going to help that consensus appear to your reader as well. And then you can get to your argument and what you're trying to get not only your reader, but your co-writer to agree with argumentatively and logically. That being said, you should also be open to having your mind changed. That's like one of the bigger, like beyond writing things in any type of collaboration or teamwork, is being willing to acquiesce to the other person's ideas, strategies, and what they're able to contribute. Logistics of exchanging drafts and comments, there's so many different ways to do it. You all can write in different colors than each other. You can draft separately and then combine in a document. Leave notes for each other, summaries of your sections, have outlines that are constantly changing. I don't have one way to recommend it. It's one of those things that's going to be very idiosyncratic to each person and then each pair. So it's something that you have to just expect to experiment with and accept that it's going to be messy. And then being open to what feels like taking on more labor. When you co-write something at this level with the research that's required, it's not going to be as easy as dividing and conquering, assigning sections like it may have been in other presentations or writing that you've done. There are going to be certain parts that require more labor and more hands-on workshopping. And then others that are more about like design and structure and maybe take a little less thinking, but more hands-on work. And so they're just going to differ in what they require of the partners to do and expect that the labor is going to be divided up differently and it's not going to be divided up neatly. You should absolutely aim to have an equitable spread of labor, but just know that dividing and conquering probably won't be the most equitable way to do that. Planning tasks does help, and then setting ground rules. Again, this is just teamwork stuff beyond writing. So the third activity is a co-writing session, and you can group up with different people, but we want to aim for 2 to 3 people in each group, and you want to start with the consulting process using this dialectic conversation to discover if you have what your interests are and if they may be in common with each other. And you can start discussing a topic and where it could possibly go from there. If you do find these compatible things, then you can start to imagine what the next steps would be. Who would be conducting the research? Who would be gathering the research? Who would want to write on methods? Who has an idea for a good introduction? Do both of you have good ideas for an introduction? Discuss whose could be stronger, how you could combine them. So the outcome of this activity, hopefully, is an actual future project that you can work on. But I also recognize, because this is being thrown together, that you may not actually have compatible interests. So hopefully, if that isn't what happens, then at least you can recognize what kind of person you will be compatible with and who you should keep your eye out for in order to do these collaborative projects in the future. So the facilitator can go ahead and pause the video for 30 minutes and then we'll regroup afterwards. All right, so that was actually your last activity for the day. These are just the works cited that I included, the students helping students, and then also the article about the nursing writing lab. In case you want to look at those, that's what I used for this presentation. I hope you're walking away with a better understanding with your own writing processes and how that can help you collaborate with other people. And ultimately, we just hope that you continue to seek help with your writing, whether it's with each other or in the writing lab or with your instructors, and you know more about what occurs between a published piece and the beginning of your graduate program. Writing is a journey and it gets messy along the way, and your emotions with it are totally valid, but I hope we helped validate that a little bit. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.